Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Michael Brown Unplugged. Glad to have you with me. Let's get started because I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I want to talk about today. You know, I've often, those of you that listen to me on radio know that I often joked about the undisclosed location. Well, that is a home that Tamara and I have had in New Mexico for a long, long time. In fact, it's been in her family since the 1960s, and it's truly our getaway. It's our getaway because it is pretty isolated. It's at about 9,000 feet, and it's just a gorgeous place that I go to rest and relax. It's got a lot of memories. It's got a lot of sentimental value to us, but it is in New Mexico. And I point out that it's in New Mexico because we really like New Mexico. We like the Southwest culture. We obviously like the New Mexican food. We like to travel to Taos and Santa Fe. We like to go, if you've never been to like Abiquiu, New Mexico, I would absolutely encourage you to do so. But New Mexico was one of those strange states where it has this great cultural heritage. It has, if you look at Albuquerque, now Albuquerque itself is not exactly the greatest city in the United States, but when you look at Corrales and you look at some of the places that are north of Albuquerque, Intel and some other high-tech companies have located there. It's a pretty diverse state. And I point all of that out because, well, the cartels are now thriving in a New Mexico county because the federal government shut down some checkpoints. Now, that alone should cause us to stop and think about border security and recognizing that just having shut down a checkpoint has allowed the cartels to thrive. Maybe we ought to rethink, or maybe we ought to be shouting from the mountaintops in New Mexico that barriers work, that checkpoints work. And I know that cartels are like a balloon. If you push the balloon in one part, it's going to expand in another part. I get that. That's why you need border security, whether it's a barrier, a wall, technology, whatever it might be. We need that all along the southern border. But let's get to the story. Alamogordo, New Mexico. Otero County last month became the first border community to declare a state of emergency. Now, I don't know what county you live in right now, but I want you to stop and think about that. Stop and think about the county that you live in declaring a state of emergency after the federal government shut down 2 local checkpoints in the area, which had traditionally provided a second line of defense against shipment of drugs and illegal aliens who were managing to sneak through the border at El Paso, about 90 miles to the south. Otero County Sheriff David Black told the New York Post, "It's a green light for the cartels when border checkpoints are down." Remember, I forget, it was Jim Acosta. Jim Acosta from CNN goes to McAllen, Texas, and he's walking along the border, and he's walking along a wall between the United States and Mexico. And Jim Acosta, being the dumbass that he is, points out to his dwindling CNN audience, "Oh, look around." As I look around, I don't really see that there's any problem here. Well, duh, you don't see any problem around there because there's a border wall. The opposite of that is now happening in Otero County, in Alamogordo. So the federal government shuts down, and I don't know why they shut them down, but they shut down 2 checkpoints. Now, according to the sheriff, he has to deploy his own overworked forces to try to stop drugs such as methamphetamines, marijuana, fentanyl, all from coming through his territory, which is home to about 65,000 people. Otero County is undefended because U.S. Customs and Border Protection shut down 2 inspection facilities on U.S. routes 54 and 70. The Border Protection agencies were sent south to El Paso because they were having to help with the massive influx of migrants from Central America who were demanding asylum. Remember that balloon I talked about? The balloon that if you hold in your hand and you squeeze it, and then you put your finger and you squeeze in one point, the balloon expands in another area? Proof, right here. So, Customs and Border Protection moves a bunch of agents to El Paso in order to deal with the influx of all of these people from Central America, all these migrant caravans who are demanding asylum. So the balloon gets squeezed, and in Otero County, 2 checkpoints get closed down. That becomes a green light for the cartels when the border checkpoints are shut down that, hey, let's move our crossings to a different area. So last week, the New York Post visited a border protection checkpoint across from the White Sands National Monument. I don't know if you've ever been to White Sands, but it is a very unique national monument. It's kind of like the Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado, except here you have this brilliant white sand for as far as the eyes can see. While the Post was there, 2 white and green vans belonging to the federal agency were just parked at the shuttered crossing facility. The Border Protection agent that was still there told the New York Post, "Well, I've had to redeploy my guys." He told the Post that his deputies had seized $60,000 worth of illicit drugs in April. That figure is markedly up from the $3,500 that was seized in January when the Border Protection checkpoints were still working. He said that we've always relied heavily on those Border Patrol checkpoints. But since last October, Border Protection agents have discovered 7 tons of marijuana and nearly half a ton of methamphetamine in the area. Now, I want to address the elephant in the room real quickly, and that's marijuana. That marijuana, some of which may be destined for Colorado, but because we've legalized marijuana in Colorado, I would venture to say that most of the marijuana that they seize in Otero County, New Mexico, because of these abandoned border checkpoints, is now headed to states where marijuana is still illegal, and the cartels can make money on them. Forget the drugs for a moment, though. Most of the drugs are being trafficked by a gang known as Barrio Aztecas, the enforcement arm of the Juarez cartel. The agent that the New York Post talked to says that they are an incredibly violent gang, that they number between 2 and 2,200 members. An additional 500 to 1,000 Barrio Aztecas are in prison in the United States. How many of these 2,000 to 2,200 that are now at this border crossing because we no longer have a checkpoint, how many of those do you think will end up committing crimes in the United States? I would say 99% of them. 99% of them. I don't know. I hope the frustration in my voice is coming through. But I have to tell you that, and I don't want it to happen to you. I don't want it to happen to anybody. But I don't know whether you care or don't care about the fact that these cartel members are incredibly, incredibly violent individuals and groups of individuals. You don't have to go to Netflix and watch Narcos. There are actually websites that you can go to. They're mostly in Spanish. They're mostly in Mexican. They're mostly from Mexican-based organizations that show the violence of the cartels throughout Mexico. That violence is now being visited upon the United States because we simply refuse, both Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats want the voters, the Republicans want the workers, and we're at this logjam when you would think that national security and that crime and law enforcement would be a top priority of the members of Congress, and that they would do whatever they need to do to open the checkpoints, to build the barriers, to build the wall, to stop this just absolute invasion of people. And I'm not talking just about the criminals. I'm talking about those who come from Central America, which are indeed S-hole countries. And I know they come here because they live in an S-hole country. I get that. But if we start accepting everybody from every S-hole country in the entire world because somehow we believe that that is representation of our values, we will have no values. It will destroy the country, just as I said in yesterday's podcast, just as Europe is being destroyed by migrants coming from the Middle East. The United States will be destroyed by migrants coming from Central America, South America, Mexico, from all over the world through a porous southern border. And we'll wake up, and it'll take some horrific tragedy. It'll take some mass killing by the gang members somewhere, by the cartels somewhere. They'll blow up Alamogordo with automatic weapon fire. They'll do something. And for a brief moment, and for just a brief moment, the country will rise up and say, something must be done. And then, because I understand exactly how Washington works, nothing will be done. Or whatever is done will simply be a facade. It will simply be something to make us feel good. Because this country has gotten soft. This country has gotten soft where we now believe that if we just, it's like shuffling the chairs on the Titanic. We'll scream, we'll holler, we might even do something at the ballot box. But what I actually fear is that it will take a shootout. It'll take a crime spree like Bonnie and Clyde, but we'll see it up close in vivid color on big screen TVs, and we'll think, oh, that's in a city not far from where I live. And at that point, we might rise up and demand that something be done. But I'm not holding out hope. Otero County, New Mexico. Proof positive that barriers work, that checkpoints work, and the lack thereof is an open door to the cartels, an open door to the migrants, and quite frankly, an open door to terrorists who want to bring down this country. Mark my words. So speaking of crime, let's talk about Cory Booker for a second. Cory Booker, Newark, New Jersey, is out with a new gun control proposal. He said recently on CNN that individuals would need to submit fingerprints, complete a background check, and show completion of a certified gun safety course. Now, I've already submitted fingerprints because of my clearances with the federal government. What good do fingerprints do? Because the people that walk into a gun store and lawfully buy a gun, well, first of all, if they're a real estate agent, they have fingerprints. If they're a lawyer, they have fingerprints. If they're a doctor, they probably have fingerprints. So there's already a wide swath of Americans, law-abiding Americans, that the government has their fingerprints. Now, if you're a criminal and you have a criminal history, one, you can't walk into that gun store and buy a gun lawfully. And if you have a criminal history, we already have your fingerprints. But that's not good enough. So presidential candidate Cory Booker, Spartacus, announced a new gun control policy that's going to require gun owners to register and obtain a federal license. Now, let me just stop for a moment. A license. I want you to think about a license for a minute. I have to have, if I want to practice law, I have to have a license. If I want to practice medicine, I have to have a license. If I want to be an electrician, I have to have a license. If I want to do plumbing, I need a license. We have licensed ourselves to death. But what do we not need a license for? If we were doing the video of the podcast, you would see me right now holding up my little pocket Constitution, which, I'm going to have to get a new one. This one's getting frayed. The First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Do I need a license to exercise my First Amendment rights of freedom of religion or abridging the freedom of speech? Do I need a license? Now, when I was on the radio station needed an FCC license in order to broadcast. One reason why I call this podcast Michael Brown Unplugged is I'm no longer constrained by the Federal Communications Commission. Not that it really makes any difference, because I still don't drop F-bombs. I still don't use the full word BS. I still don't curse. The language that I use on the podcast is FCC compliant. Freedom of the press. Do you need a license? The right of the people peaceably to assemble. Yeah, sometimes the government requires a license, but in the true context of the plain meaning of the language, that Congress shall make no law respecting the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances, no license is required. You're not required to have a license if you want to invoke your Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. So why do we believe and why do we accept the BS from a Cory Booker that says that if you want to exercise your Second Amendment rights, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed? Except for Cory Booker, Spartacus, who wants us to get a license to exercise our Second Amendment rights. I think what Booker's really trying to do is he's trying to gain some momentum in the Democrat Party, trying to get some attention since he sits at about 2.5% in the Real Clear Politics average of polls. Now, over at the Washington Examiner, Emily Larson reports in this story, Democratic presidential candidate Cory Booker on Monday unveiled a new gun control plan that calls for federal licenses for gun owners and an investigation into the National Rifle Association's nonprofit status. The NRA is under attack. I've never been a member of the NRA. I've put my money in other Second Amendment rights organizations. But I'm about to reach the tipping point where I may join the NRA just to give them whatever the membership dues are to help them fight this left flank attack from Democrats against a lawful organization. Cory Booker, when he started talking about his plan, outlined it to CNN this way.
Let me ask you now to switch to your new plan on guns. Why is licensing guns the solution?
Well, first of all, it's evidence-based. We know it works. In states like Connecticut that have done it, they have seen 40% drops in gun violence, 15% drops in suicide rates.
I don't know he just states that as a fact. One, I don't know whether it's a fact or not. But I'd certainly like to see the causal link between whatever Connecticut has done and a drop in gun violence. Because overall, in the country as a whole, there is declining gun violence. Now, you wouldn't know that by watching the evening news. You wouldn't know that by reading the newspaper. You wouldn't know that by listening to a bunch of yahoos on the left side of the political spectrum talk. But gun violence has been on a steady decline in the United States over the past 20, 30 years. So where's your evidence, Senator?
But this is a bigger issue in America where we're not approaching it or taking it on in proportion to the gravity of the consequences of our inaction.
I got to stop for a minute. We're not taking this on in proportion to the gravity of the situation. If you listen to the first segment of this podcast, I talked about the cartels that have literally overrun Otero County, New Mexico. Yet we're not responding to the gravity of that situation. Isn't it fascinating how politicians pick and choose the gravity of certain situations to do what? To push their agenda. And in this case, it is an anti-gun agenda.
Day in America, we have in the aggregate a mass shooting, ripping apart communities, over 100 people dying of gun violence. We form governments to protect, for the common defense. And here we have, in my lifetime, more people being killed by gun violence in every single war in our country's history from the Revolutionary War now combined.
I think I covered that in one of the first few podcasts that I did, but that is factually incorrect. That is just an out-and-out lie.
We must step up and deal with something that is crushing communities, destroying lives, and really just tearing apart families.
One of the pushbacks is you license guns, you make it more difficult for the honorable gun owner to get there, to engage in their Second Amendment right, and the people who want to get guns and shoot each other in the street are going to do it anyway because no one enforces the laws.
That kind of resignation frustrates me, to be honest.
That kind of resignation, it's not resignation, it's factually correct. If you start licensing the purchase of firearms, do you think the thug that goes down somewhere and decides to buy, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Colorado, I'm going to use Federal Boulevard as an example, but Federal Boulevard or Colfax Avenue, Hells Bells, downtown Denver, for that matter, some of the highest crime areas in this state, do you think that the thugs in those areas that are looking to buy a gun are going to say, oh, hey, thanks, Thug A, for selling me, Thug B, a gun. Now let me go down to the local, I don't know, the ATF or wherever you have to go. Are we going to have like a DMV for gun purchases? And once you buy your gun, you have to take it down to the DMV for guns and license it? This is insanity.
Because we know that this is not a plan that any law-abiding gun owner should be concerned about. The people that should be concerned about it are two groups. One, people who want to break the law, gun runners and criminals, and the gun manufacturers who have been working in an ungodly way to undermine the safety and security of this nation.
Whoa. The criminals don't care. But let's talk about gun manufacturers for a second, and let's talk about gun owners. Because I am not required, under the Second Amendment, to register my firearm. And if we understand our history, which I'm afraid most people don't, but if we understand the history and the background of the Second Amendment, we know that the Second Amendment is not necessarily, it's not really about defending your home. It's not really about the ability to go hunt and shoot Bambi. No, the Second Amendment is really about guaranteeing a free state, a well-regulated militia. You guys should be, truthfully, you guys should be able to repeat this verbatim when I start to say it. When I start to read the Second Amendment, I can imagine a chorus of you listening to this podcast, repeating verbatim exactly what I'm about to say. The Second Amendment is not about going out to hunt Bambi. The Second Amendment is not about defending your home against a thug. The Second Amendment is about a well-regulated militia, and if you understand the Heller decision and Justice Scalia's discussion about a well-regulated militia, the well-regulated militia is you and me. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Why would the federal government, why would a federal government, a national government, want a database of every gun that you and I own? I don't even think Tamara knows all the guns that I own. I don't want to know all the guns that you own. My friend Marty and I often joke with each other because when we're at dinner with our wives, if he's bought a new gun or I've bought a new gun, we wait till they start talking about something else and then, hey, guess what I got today? But I don't know how many guns Marty owns. Marty doesn't know how many guns I own. I don't want to know how many he's got. I'll be jealous. Or if he knows about mine, he might be jealous. The point of this is the federal government has no business knowing how many guns that I own. Because if the Second Amendment is truly about the necessity of us being armed to guarantee a free republic, the federal government that could become the enemy has no justification, no legal right, no constitutional right to know how many guns you and I own. But Cory Booker is also asked, because one of Cory Booker's ideas is about having a buyback program. Now, I always find the buyback programs fascinating because, guess what? I bought my guns. Now, I've got a couple from Tamara's dad, and I've got a couple from, I've got one really old rifle from my grandfather. You're not getting those, even though I didn't buy them. All of the other guns that I have throughout my house, in my gun safe, I paid for. I bought them. So the whole concept of a buyback flies in the face. What else? What else? Seriously, what else do you think you own? The government ought to be able to step in and say, you can no longer own that big screen TV. You can no longer own that laptop. You can no longer own this microphone. So we're going to buy it back. Cory Booker's asked about his buyback program because we know that Congressman Swalwell, however you pronounce his name, from California, and now Cory Booker want to do buyback programs. The congressman from California, Swalwell, wants to actually prosecute and jail people who refuse to sell their lawfully owned guns back to, or to, not back to because it never belonged to them, but sell to the federal government your lawfully purchased guns.
Before you go, just one final question on your gun proposal, since you've just released it this morning. Your competitor in the 2020 race, Congressman Eric Swalwell, has also, like you, proposed an assault weapons ban, but he's proposing a buyback program where Americans who currently have those guns could sell them, essentially, to the government. But if they don't, within a certain period of time, they would be prosecuted, so subject to be thrown in jail, perhaps. Are you supportive of the same measure?
Well, first of all, when I was mayor of the city of Newark, again, I have a record on dealing with gun violence. We did a lot of gun buybacks and even other creative ideas that I think we should have when I'm president of the United States. The critical thing is, I think most Americans agree that these weapons of war should not be on our streets.
But would you prosecute people? Do you support the government buying them back? And if not, potentially people could go to jail if they don't want to sell them back. Yes or no?
Again, we should have a law that bans these weapons, and we should have a reasonable period in which people can turn in these weapons. Right now, we have a nation that allows, in streets and communities like mine, these weapons that should not exist.
These weapons that should not exist. Who made the decision that... I'm sorry, pause for a moment. Did you ever hear him answer the question? Of course not. Do you think that even a far lefty like Spartacus wants to tell the American public, to tell the owners of the 300 million plus guns in the United States, that if you do not submit your gun for purchase by the federal government, We will prosecute you, and if you are found guilty, we will jail you or fine you. Of course he doesn't want to say that, because they know they can't do that. But it doesn't stop them from doing what? Attacking the NRA, attacking the gun manufacturers, both of which are legal entities. One is selling a membership, advocating for Second Amendment rights, a completely lawful activity. And the other, the gun manufacturers, are selling a lawful product, a firearm. A firearm which is guaranteed by the Constitution that you and I have a right to keep and bear. Watch this closely, because as this continues, as they get more and more brazen in their proposals, I think we'll begin to see actual attacks on the Second Amendment. So far, all of this dust that we see as they're like Pigpen in the Peanuts comics, as Pigpen kind of wanders around stirring up the dust, they're giving the Second Amendment a wide berth. Why? Because they know they can't get around it. Because they know the minute they start directly attacking the Second Amendment, you and I will rise up, and you and I will defeat them. In the meantime, they work on the periphery. It's the way progressives work. If you can start nibbling on the edges, if you can take down the NRA, if you can attack the gun manufacturers for selling the equivalent of a cigarette. You know, the difference between the guns and the cigarette is this. The manufacturers of the cigarettes knew that tobacco was harmful. Yet people made a choice, which I always thought is what those on the left advocated, was that we should all have a choice. People chose to smoke. Guns, a lawful product. A gun innately by itself is not a danger. The gun is only a danger when you break into my home or my business and I choose to use that gun to defend myself or my property. Or the gun is a danger when it's in the hands of a criminal. But do not allow criminals to dictate how we interpret the Constitution, or to somehow allow criminals to abrogate the Constitution. You've heard me say it on many occasions that I believe that the culture leads the politics and that politics trails the culture. One of the ways that we look at our culture is to look around at the things that we buy, the movies and entertainment, the things that we consume. One of the things that we consume is fast food. Now, I know too many cheeseburgers are probably going to kill you, but I'm not here advocating that you consume fast food all the time. What I am here to advocate is that fast food, as a reflection of our culture, has really gone off the deep end. And the example that I've got is a new Burger King commercial. Now, if you want some reason to avoid the stuff that Burger King sells, this ad provides a few reasons. Now, unfortunately, you can't see the video, but it looks like Burger King has just given up on selling its junk food and is now instead selling misery, self-indulgence, skankiness. You know, I don't think I've ever used the word skanky on either the radio or the podcast, but they are selling skankiness, juvenile behavior, and they're selling unwed teenage motherhood. Listen to this commercial. This is some sort of I don't know. I don't understand. You know, McDonald's. At least their commercials are about Happy Meals. They're about, friends having fun together and going to McDonald's and having a cheeseburger, and it's all happiness and it's all a joy, joy, joy. Burger King, I think, as a reflection of our culture, has gone the opposite direction with this spot. Now listen closely, and then I'll explain at the end of the spot some of the really kind of depressing things that they're now trying to use to sell burgers.
Not everybody wakes up happy.
See, I'm sorry. I have to pause it right there. Yeah, not everybody wakes up happy. So if you wake up sad, depressed, angry, you just feel like you can't go on, well then, go to Burger King.
Not everybody wakes up happy. Sometimes you feel sad, scared, crappy. All I ask is that you let me feel my way.
Feeling blue. Kinda down. Can't wait to leave this closed-minded town.
Can't wait to leave this closed-minded town. Almost like a Clint Eastwood line. I can't wait to leave this closed-minded town. I'm going to go someplace where they got a Burger King because I'm sad and depressed and I need a Whopper.
My boss is such a freaking creep. I just told him to go f*** himself. When I'm feeling weird or sappy, not all angry, just not happy. All I ask is that you let me feel my way.
I can't believe my student loan.
Are you ready to go buy a Whopper? Are you thinking about like a double Whopper, a triple Whopper, and a large order of fries, and not even a Diet Coke? You want a fully leaded Coke. You want all that sugar. You want all those carbs. You want everything, right? Because you're depressed. You have student loan debt. This is proving my point that the culture is a reflection of our politics. We're all depressed. We can't wait to get out of this skanky town.
I'm never moving out of my parents' home.
Just got ghosted. Should've known. Pretty sure I'll end up alone.
They say I'm too young to raise my baby girl. Take your opinions and suck it, world.
Last few seconds, Burger King was throwing a lot of acronyms across the screen. So I want to tell you about two of them. YAAAS. Any of you know what that stands for? Now remember, they're trying to sell burgers. They're trying to sell fries. They're trying to get you to go through the drive-thru or come in and order as much of whatever Burger King sells. I don't go to Burger King, so I don't know. YAAAS. In the kids' lingo, that means you are an a-hole. So Burger King is trying to sell burgers based on an acronym that you are an a-hole. Or this one, DGAF. DGAF. Don't give a F-bomb. Burger King. Have it your way if you're able to get out of bed or out of your parents' basement, or you're a teenage unwed mother with a screaming baby get to Burger King? Yeah, I'd say our culture is in really bad shape. I'd say our culture sucks. Congressman Al Green has decided that it is time to impeach Obama, and that we have to impeach Obama because that is the only way that we can keep him from getting reelected. Now, I find that whole theorem pretty fascinating because from my perspective, if the Democrats overreach and decide that they want to impeach Barack Obama, boy, was that a Freudian slip or was that a Freudian slip? My theory is that if the Democrats overreach and if they truly want to impeach Donald Trump, that almost guarantees his reelection. Look at the impeachment of Bill Clinton. But listen to what Al Green has to say.
You've been calling for starting articles of impeachment since 2017, but a new Quinnipiac poll taken after the release of the redacted Mueller report found that 66% say Congress should not start impeachment proceedings. And there's a sharp partisan divide, as we all know, with only 4% of Republicans favoring impeachment. Congressman, are you concerned that impeachment talk may actually help the president's reelection?
Now, I'm fascinated because I think that was Chris Hayes on MSNBC. Actually sets up a pretty good softball for him. Here are the numbers. Most Americans are opposed to impeachment. If you do this, aren't you actually setting up the possibility of helping Donald Trump get reelected? Now, what you're about to hear is Congressman Al Green, no, not that Al Green, this Al Green, citing character issues and suspicion of wrongdoing instead of any alleged impeachable offenses as his reasons. You know, the House, which has to pass the articles of impeachment, there has to be some basis for those articles of impeachment. Now, they can do it without any basis, but once it gets to the U.S. Senate for a trial that is managed and overseen by the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, the senators are going to start looking for evidence. You have impeachment managers in the House, and those impeachment managers are kind of like the prosecutors. The Senate is like the jury. So if the House Democrats pass articles of impeachment, then those House managers have to walk across the Capitol to the Senate chamber, and they have to make their case to convict Donald Trump. You cannot convict on a character issue. You cannot convict on suspicion of wrongdoing. Now, having said that, I should probably be a little more precise and say, well, the Senate could really convict on just about anything they want to. But doing so means that you and I, the people of the United States, who have the ultimate power, have just lost that power. Because we elected Donald Trump. He got the majority of the electoral votes. He wins the presidency. If you don't like the fact that he won the presidency, then you need to put up a candidate that you think can defeat him in the 2020 election cycle. I think most Americans, if they see Donald Trump impeached and they see him impeached on suspicion of wrongdoing, because you know the Senate trial will be televised. It will be like the Watergate hearings in the 70s. It will be wall-to-wall coverage. And goobers like you and me will watch every second of it. And I think if they tried to impeach him on character issues or suspicion of wrongdoing, Donald Trump gets reelected. But what does Al Green have to say?
I'm concerned that if we don't impeach this president, he will get reelected.
So you're going to impeach him as a way to prevent him from getting reelected. Can I just, between you and me, tell you something that I truly believe? I really do wish the House would pass articles of impeachment. because I think the blowback against the Democrats would be a tsunami that would just bury them. I want them to impeach because first, you got to remember, the U.S. Senate is controlled by the Republicans. You will never get the votes to impeach this president in the United States Senate as it is currently configured. But I want the impeachment articles to pass, and I want them to go to the U.S. Senate because, to Al Green's point, the only way to prevent Donald Trump from being reelected is if we impeach him. Listen again.
I'm concerned that if we don't impeach this president, he will get reelected. If we don't impeach him, he will say he has been vindicated. He will say the Democrats had an overwhelming majority in the House and they didn't take up impeachment. He will say that we had a constitutional duty to do it if it was there and we didn't. He will say that he has been vindicated. But here's what I say. We're confronting a constitutional crisis as I speak to you. As I look the people of America in the eye, I'm telling you we have a constitutional crisis. When the chief executive officer, the president of the United States, refuses to comply with subpoenas and says he will order others to do so, this creates a constitutional crisis. But this isn't the genesis of it. It started when the president decided he would fire Mr. Comey for his failure, as a result of his desire not to be investigated.
Oh, by the way, Congressman, you should know, if you understand the Constitution, the president has the authority to fire any member of his cabinet, anybody in the executive branch, other than civil service employees, for any reason or for no reason. That's the authority of the chief executive. That's the authority of the president. The lies that swirl around about the firing of James Comey just drive me bonkers.
And when he decided to do this, and he went on TV, national TV at prime time, and indicated he was thinking about this Russia thing, that was the genesis of it. We have a constitutional crisis. I regret that I'm the canary in the coal mine.
Stop. What's the constitutional crisis? Now, he's going to go on to say that it's because of the subpoenas.
I regret that I was the person who had to first say that there's some obstruction taking place here.
Wait a minute. No obstruction was found. If obstruction had been found, the special counsel would have made that recommendation in his report. He did not do so.
I regret that it has to be me, but it has to be somebody. And I take my duties seriously. I love my country, Mr. Mena, and
I love my country too. That doesn't have anything to do with it. I honestly believe, and this may irritate some of you, but I honestly believe that most progressives, most Democrats truly do love this country. They just want to fundamentally transform it into something that I don't think is what this country is intended to be. Loving your country, that's a canard that has no room in the discussion or the debate.
I want you to know this. We must impeach this president. If we don't, it's not the soul of the nation that will be at risk only. It is the soul of the Congress that's at risk. Congress has a...
Whoa. Congress has a soul? Stop the presses. I demand an investigation to find the soul of Congress. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that.
Duty, a responsibility, and an obligation that only it can fulfill. No one else can, no other entity can. It is Congress that will have to act. And if we put people above party, we'll act properly. But if...
Oh, blah, 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 blah. I want to ask you a question. Do you think that Al Green and these other Democrats might be ratcheting up their calls for an impeachment in a blatant attempt to blunt the blows they think might hit the Democrats once the Department of Justice Inspector General report comes out? Or are they doing it because they despise this president so much and they're actually willing to take the risk in hopes that their efforts don't ultimately backfire on them come election time? I actually think it's a combination of both. I actually think they fear the fact that the Attorney General is conducting this investigation into how all of these other investigations got started. And I think they fear that the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, the Department of Justice, that he may actually come out with some criminal referrals against some of these FBI agents and maybe even some of these Department of Justice attorneys. I think that's what they fear. And I think all of these comments about impeachment are a way to distract you and I, and more importantly, the uninformed or drive-by consumer of news that, oh yeah, perhaps Donald Trump ought to be impeached because they simply don't know better. I think the Democratic impeachment circus has gotten out of control, and unless the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, can rein them in, I think we're going to see their poll numbers on impeachment continue to crater in the months to come. But that won't stop them. Do you think that that's going to stop Maxine Waters, from her calls for impeachment? Do you think Al Green, who says he's the canary in the coal mine, do you think that's going to stop him? Of course it's not. Because he spoke the truth. And it is amazing to me, if you listen closely to Democrats on these talk shows, on the liberal networks, they tell the truth. The rest of the cable news channels, the rest of the media outlets, ignore it. You want the truth about what Al Green says about impeachment? It's right here.
You've been calling for starting...
Sorry about that. Let me start it where I wanted to start it, which is right here.
I'm concerned that if we don't impeach this president, he will get reelected.
That's the truth of the matter right there. They want to impeach because they believe that's how they stop Donald Trump from getting reelected. That's the state of our politics. We can't just accept the results of an election and move on to the next election. We have to try to, I shouldn't say we, they have to try to undo the results of an election. And mark my words, that is precisely what they are doing. This isn't really about whether there were high crimes and misdemeanors committed. This is about preventing the re-election of Donald Trump at any and all costs and undoing the results of the 2016 election. Their hatred of Donald Trump, their hatred of Republicans, of conservatism, is palpable and disgusting. Why do all the good stories come out of Florida? Why can't we have a good story like this come out of Colorado or wherever you live? Punta Gorda, Florida. I know Punta Gorda well. Punta Gorda was hit by a hurricane back in 2004, and it was it was amazing. Punta Gorda is south of Tampa, St. Pete, and everybody thought, just a sidebar here, I'm sorry, I got to tell the story. So as Hurricane, I think it was Hurricane Charlie, as Hurricane Charlie was making its way up the Gulf Coast of Florida, everybody was convinced it was going to go to Tampa St. Pete, which was going to be a horrible disaster because Tampa St. Pete, much like New Orleans, is really slow for the water to move out. So the flooding would have been horrendous. And Hurricane Charlie was a pretty strong hurricane. I think it was a Category 3 or 4, so it had pretty good winds. So all of these owners of private aircraft moved their planes to Punta Gorda. Well, as Mother Nature is often wont to do, Mother Nature does what Mother Nature wants, and the hurricane made a sharp right turn and went straight to the airport in Punta Gorda. There are a couple of pictures of me and President Bush at the airport with these overturned and smashed airplanes all around us. I should pull that picture out and put it up on Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram, you should be. Michael D. Brown. Wildlife officials are now investigating after a woman pulled an alligator out of her pants during a traffic stop in Florida, according to the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. Hey, is that a pickle is that a potato or a pickle in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me? Why, no, officer. It's even better than that. It's an alligator. The bizarre gator smuggling case came to light after deputies asked the woman, who has not been publicly identified, a standard law enforcement question. Do you have anything else? Now, I don't know. I get stopped. I'm not going to answer much of anything. This is my name. This is my address. Beyond that, I clam up. Oh, Mr. Brown, do you have anything else? Yeah. You want to see the alligator in my pants? That's a new euphemism. Yeah, you want to see my alligator? The 25-year-old woman then pulled a foot-long reptile out of the yoga pants she was wearing, according to television station WBBH. She also had 41 small three-striped turtles in the vehicle. The woman was riding with a 22-year-old man who deputies say rolled through a stop sign in Punta Gorda, leading to the traffic stop. The man allegedly told deputies the pair had been scavenging for frogs and snakes. Hey, baby, you want to go on a scavenger hunt with me? Yeah, we might find an alligator. After citing the driver for the moving violation, the television station reports that deputies were making sure they didn't have any protected species when they found the alligators and the turtles. The Florida Wildlife Conservation officers responded to the scene and continued to investigate. Are you happy to see me, or is that an alligator in your pants? So it's the end of the world, and this very well may be the last podcast that I'm able to do. I'm sorry to say, but it's, if you're not running for the hills now, you don't know how bad it is. A new report by the United Nations, it's a UN report. Never mind. A new report by the United Nations reveals that the planet is not just doomed, but is really, really doomed if we do not submit to transformative change. Sell your cars, kill your kids, don't have any more kids, downsize your house, get rid of your air conditioning, get rid of your heating, get rid of your electricity. What else? Let's see, cars, housing. Food. We need to just start eating maggots and grubs, I think. Listen to this. If you don't want to just kill yourself after listening to this CNN report, between that and the Burger King commercials, I've done everything I can today to try to put you guys in a deep funk so that you've got to go get some antidepressive medication. Well, Doctor, I was listening to the Michael Brown Unplugged podcast, and after this one episode, I couldn't go on living. I couldn't get out of bed. Well, why don't you quit listening to him? Because he's so damn good. Listen to this CNN report and tell me if you don't want to just give up.
Live from Los Angeles. This is stunning, Nick.
It is. Listen, Alison, this 1,800-page report is designed to be a wake-up call because, take this fact. So since the early 1990s, so just a tiny sliver of global history, the footprint of our urban footprint has basically more than doubled. And apparently that is just not sustainable. So after years of research and 6 days meeting in Paris, Now,
you understand what he means, the urban footprint. So the standard metropolitan statistical areas, the SMSAs, like the greater New York City area, the greater Denver area, the greater Chicago area, the greater Houston area, those have doubled over the past, he says 1990s. So doing my math, that's not 10 years, that's almost like 20 years. But hey, who's counting? Who's doing math? Math is hard. He's saying that because the urban areas have grown in such size that they're no longer sustainable. I drove around Denver yesterday, and other than some sucky traffic, it seemed pretty sustainable to me.
These experts have come up with this report, and here are some of the horrific headlines.
Around 1 million species now face extinction, many within decades.
So what? So what? 1 million species. So some little flea somewhere, some little unique species of flea is about to go extinct, and I'm supposed to care about that? I don't. And by the way, 1 million species? I haven't done the research, so Agent Jet A or Uncle Pete or whoever is listening to the podcast, how many species currently exist? How many species over the life of the planet have existed and gone out of existence? I'm just curious, because 1 million species to me, that's a yawner.
Because of humans. 3/4 of all the land on Earth has been significantly altered in just the past 50 years by humans.
So what? Altered? Altered is just a verb.
Plastic pollution at sea is up tenfold since 1980.
What does that mean? Up tenfold? Does that mean we now have 1,100 plastic straws? Or 900 plastic straws? Statistics that are meaningless.
Our fault.
For a species that named itself Homo sapiens, the wise man, we're being incredibly stupid.
The human population has doubled in just 50 years. Our agriculture consumes more and more land. Natural habitats are shrinking. We continue to pollute. The climate continues to warm, and natural ecosystems crumble at an accelerating rate.
I'm sorry, this is the end of the podcast. I have to go put a bullet in my brain. Oh, we cannot survive. It's the end. It's the end of the world as we know it.
145 leading experts from 50 countries spent 3 years compiling this gargantuan report, reaching frightening conclusions.
The other organisms of the planet are our life support systems. You don't have to worry about them if you don't care about eating, if you don't care about breathing, if you don't care about having fresh water and so on. Then you can just forget about it and die.
The authors hope this work will land like last year's bombshell UN global warming report, which galvanized the Green movement.
Oh, so that's the purpose of this. The purpose of this report is to galvanize those on the left who want to fundamentally transform how we live. Take us back to the Stone Age. I'm not buying it.
And spurred politicians towards more urgent action.
We must also face the existential threat of our time, the climate crisis.
As for our rapidly dwindling biodiversity, these experts claim it's the 11th hour. We must act now.
Oh, it's the 11th hour. Well, never mind. I've got an hour to go, so I'm going to go grab something to eat, and I'll be back in an hour. And if the world's still here, I'll continue the podcast. And if the world has ended because we only have an hour left, well, I hope you enjoyed the podcast so far.
Consuming less, polluting less, having fewer children.
Having fewer children. Fewer rugrats. But if you have fewer rugrats, who are you going to indoctrinate?
Very, very optimistic about what we could do in theory. I'm very pessimistic about what we will do.
1/8 of all animal and plant species on Earth now at risk of extinction because of us.
Wait a minute. 1/8? 1/8?
And as this report states, nature is essential for human existence.
Oh, what a brilliant conclusion. Nature is essential for human civilization. You know, like air, water, food. These goobers who continually try to make most of us live in fear are despicable. It is an ignorance of how human progress, when you look at the human progress over just the past 20 or 30 years, we have virtually eliminated extreme poverty around the world. We have virtually eliminated malnutrition around the world. We are making such strides technologically, ecologically, socially. Mankind is, if we are truly made in the image of God, which I believe that we are, We have not developed a minuscule amount of the capability that the human mind has. But if you listen to this kind of report, it is the end of the world as we know it.
Now, one reason that Professor Ehrlich, who we just heard from, says he's pessimistic is because Donald Trump is in the White House. Donald Trump...
And there you have it. Save the planet by defeating Donald Trump or impeaching him. I didn't realize how simple this was. We just need to get Donald Trump out of the White House, and we will reach utopia. Utopia. We won't need socialism. We won't need fascism, communism. We will just inherently reach utopia if we just get rid of Donald Trump. If you don't believe that there is bias in the news media,
one reason that Professor Ehrlich, who we just heard from, says he's pessimistic is because Donald Trump is in the White House. Donald Trump, of course, has vowed to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and he recently tweeted this quote: "The whole climate crisis is not only fake news, it's fake science. There is no climate crisis." So will the president listen to a climate skeptic on Fox and Friends, or will he listen to the 145 global experts who just put this report together? Well, John and Alison will just have to wait and see.
We'll just have to wait and get rid of Donald Trump, stop those tweets, and everything will be fine. You know, since we've not really achieved utopia yet, we still have independent nations. We still have different sovereign nations. But the United Nations bureaucrats, the goobers at the United Nations, will helpfully tell those independent nations what they must do to save the planet. From the report, the United Nations suggests moving away from gross domestic product, GDP, something that, just as a footnote, apparently John Hickenlooper, the former governor of Colorado, didn't know what GDP stood for. They, the United Nations, suggest moving away from GDP as a key measure of economic wealth and instead adopting more holistic approaches that would capture quality of life and long-term effects. You know why? That's because the limited paradigm of economic growth hurts the animals. We got to lower our standard of living, and governments have got to stop encouraging the production of food and energy. It's nice that they want to help the animals. But if their goal were to hurt humans, they'd make exactly the same recommendations. Hey, thanks for listening to this edition of Michael Brown Unplugged. I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate you following me on Spreaker. So here's the usual request. Don't ignore this. I'm watching you. I really want you to go to michaelbrowntoday.com, my website. And at the website, michaelbrowntoday.com, you'll find the little button down there for Spreaker, where you can subscribe to the Michael Brown Unplugged podcast. I would really appreciate you doing that. I'd also appreciate you liking the podcast and then sharing it with your friends. We post these. They get posted every morning so that you have time to download them if you want to listen to them on your way to work. You can download, stream them anytime you want to. But we do it early in the morning so that you can have a chance to get the Michael Brown commentary as quickly as possible, because you never know when the world's going to end, and you need that Michael Brown commentary before the world ends, as the UN tells us that it's going to. So go to michaelbrowntoday.com, subscribe to the podcast. We also put the podcast up on YouTube. So if you'd like to listen to them on YouTube, you can do that there too. And if you go over to YouTube, well, while you're there, be a good listener and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you go to michaelbrowntoday.com, across the bottom, you'll see all of the icons for all the social media platforms that I'm engaged in. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. What am I leaving out? Whatever I'm leaving out, you'll find at michaelbrowntoday.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow morning.